So this is the Azure Functions and APIM, which is the API management. And we are going to go through this together today. And so let me see where my presentation went here. So this is me, I'm Brian, and I have a few certifications, and I wrote a book called Practical Internet Framework, and I had a course out there on Git, if you're interested in any of that. Hook up with me on LinkedIn or at BL Gorman on Twitter, and let's connect and talk about anything you want in the Azure developer space, anything else I can help you with, or anything you're struggling with or want to see a talk on, or need to just shoot a couple ideas back and forth to see what happens. Anyway, I've about 20 years of experience programming in .NET, basically since it came out in beta, and I've done a lot of other training and development along the way as well. So hopefully, hopefully continue to get to do that for a while. All right. So today we are going to create a function app. We're going to lock down the functions. We're going to create an APIM instance and create the APIs. Then we'll create products and subscriptions and see how that all works together. And then we'll authorize the APIM for the functions. So we're going to lock down these functions so that they can't just be called by anybody. And we're going to use the facade of the API management solution in order to provide access to that using managed identities. So it's going to be really fun and quite easy and straightforward to set up. Now, just in case you're interested in seeing all that, that's the only slides we have for today. So everything else is going to be live in the portal. And just so that you know, it basically comes down to that when we're done at the summary and such. So there is a walkthrough on this that I created a while back here in December on the Azure Functions and APIM. It's at majorguidancesolutions.com on my blog. And if you just go to courses majorguidancesolution.com blog, it's very easy to find. It's the very top one at the current moment. I likely will get some more out there eventually. I mean to write more than obviously I get to. So working with Azure Functions, the Azure API management offering, you can see the entire walkthrough here, but things that we're going to do today. All right, and so I will try to refer to that as little as possible as we go through these activities together, but I may need to have you bear with me for a second if I got to double check on something, just in case I don't want to make a lot of mistakes here. So, all right, so without further ado, let's dive in. So we're going to have our Azure functions that we're going to create, and so let's go ahead and get this out there. So we're going to go create a function app. And so this function app, we can call it whatever we want. And so you put it on your subscription in the resource group that you're wanting just to group everything together. It does have to be unique. So we're just going to call this APIM AF demo, and that's good enough for today. So we're good to go. We'll do the .NET Core Run Stack version 3.1 Central US hosting because that's where I'm at. You could do other solutions there, obviously, if you wanted. You can also look further into your hosting. Different things you want to do. Plan type consumption is what I'm doing today. Application insights just built in there, and essentially they're going to get this thing deployed. Now, just to kind of speed up the process a little while that's deploying, let's go do an API management as well. We'll need this eventually, and we'll talk about a couple things here. This is a little bit out of order from what would be done in the walkthrough, but I'm assuming the walkthrough you're doing on your own and you aren't really on a time crunch. So here again, we're going to just put this into our same resource group for the simple reason that I'll probably delete all this right after the talk. And again, I want to do everything kind of in the central US since that's close to me. So this is going to be my API management, so we can just call this whatever we want to call it, but basically we want to make it so that it's useful. So we'll just call it the APIM instance demo or something. And hey, that worked. What do you know? Organization name can be whatever you want, so we'll just do Skill Me Up today. And administrator email can also be whatever you want. So I like bob@bob.com, or if you don't want to send anybody an email by accident, bob@example.com, whatever. All right, the pricing tier, we're going to use the developer tier, or excuse me, we're going to use the consumption tier. The developer tier and more are a little more powerful with things like doing your throttling of users, a little more, but with the policies there. Also, you get the full developer portal, which is something like a Swagger page that people can go to and request access to your APIs and also view what your APIs are to offer. We don't care about any of that for this demo. All of these take about 45 minutes or so to spin up. The consumption plan usually spins up in about 5 minutes or less. And so I'm just going to go ahead and use that same application insights for today. We won't even need it anyway. The managed identity. Now, this is really interesting here. We want this on, but I'm going to leave it off for now so that we can see some stuff as we go later. If you're creating this on your own and you were going to do this walkthrough, or you were going to basically be setting this up for your solution, you want this status to be on for this, just to save yourself a step later. Well, and I'm going to show you how to fix that later. So that's why I'm leaving it off on purpose. We're not going to use a VPN. We're going to leave all these settings to the default, but you can see that you could change them if you want to. Of course, you can always do tags on any resource in Azure as needed. So we're going to go ahead and get this deployed here quick. As soon as the validation passes, hopefully the validation will pass. And there it did. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and kick that off. All right, our Azure functions are done. So the first thing we need to do is create a couple of Azure functions that we're going to use. And we're not going to go into detail about how to write Azure functions today. That's going to be something for another talk, another day. Today, what we're talking about is how to lock down Azure functions that exist and how to create access to them through the API management instance. That way you can keep the world away from your functions, but give them to your clients as needed. So this is just going to be a simple authorization function and a simple anonymous function. So we'll start with the simple anonymous function. So we'll just go ahead and add. And we're going to do HTTP triggers on both of them. And we're going to allow both get and post. We don't really care for today, but you obviously would lock yours down more as you created yours. So here's an anonymous function with an authorization level of anonymous. Surprise, surprise. And so as we complete this one, let's go ahead and add a second one. It never likes it when I go too fast here. So it's going to go ahead and deploy that. It's out there. We could actually get the function URL now and execute it. And it would say, hey, you need to enter your name. So then we would say name equals Brian. Hey, Brian, it works. Okay, so let's create another function here. And so that's going to be in our function app, clickety click, functions. We're going to add a new function here. And the only reason we're doing two here is just to show differences between the APIM instance and doing things. And so you can ultimately use different apps, different web apps, different third-party apps, whatever you want. We're just going to use one function app to simulate that today. So this is just going to be the simple authorization function. And this is going to be a function level keyed function. It's going to be the exact same function as the other one, so there won't be any way to tell them apart other than the URL or URI that's being called on the functions. If we go ahead and get the function URL for this one, you see that we will likely need a key to make this work. And once we have that, we can then say, and name equals authorized or something. Hello, authorized. All right, so we're good to go there. And so another good thing to do once we have those set up is to make sure that we can get to our different functions in multiple ways. So we could do them through the API management. Ultimately, we can do them through our functions through the web, but we can also do it through Postman. And Postman is going to be important for me to be able to show a couple things here later. So I want to go ahead and get that going early on here. So let's go ahead and bring Postman in, and then hopefully I won't have to change too much on these. So testing my simple anonymous function, I just need to get my AP, whatever the name of this thing is, the demo, and place that here. And let's go ahead and send that. So that one works. And then let's take that same on the test simple authorization. And that one fails because we don't have the right key here, which is what we would have expected. So let's grab that code, which we could have gotten from a number of places, but it's right here. All right, so our test simple anonymous and our test simple authorization functions are now working from our APIM calls, from our Postman calls into our Azure functions. And so that is awesome, except for now the whole world has this. And even if we have our function key available and we say we're locking it down by the function key, you know that this is only as secure as this key. And as soon as somebody gets mad at you or posts it on Twitter or puts it in their repo that's public or whatever it might be, the next thing you know, everybody's calling your function, or potentially, because your functions are so awesome, everybody wants to call them, right? And so therefore your site's going down. And yeah, so. All right. So we need to lock these down. So how do we do that? All right. So first of all, let's go into our Azure Functions. And we're going to go back to our function app here. So let me just go back to that. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the authentication and authorization to block these functions from being executed. And so we want to do app service authentication. And there's two things to configure here. And the first thing we're going to do is forget to do the first one, which is the anonymous requests. And we're going to just go ahead and say, the only way to get in is through the Azure Active Directory. You can see other options could be configured here as well, but we're going to use our Active Directory to lock down our functions. So to start this off, we'll just use the expressed and let this create an app called APIM AF demo. That's going to register an app with our app registrations, which will be important later. And we can just leave everything else to default. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK on that and save. And if you don't save, big problems happen because things don't actually get saved. So we saved it. And we're going to go out and we're going to hit our functions thinking that, oh, you have to be authorized. Oh, wait. Okay, still deploying. So that's fine. So let's go ahead and just call these over here as well. Okay. Oh, it's still working. It's still working. Now, why is it still working? Well, if you remember when we were back on this page over here, I mentioned that we wanted to make sure not to allow anonymous. And I forgot to do that, of course, on purpose, but I wanted to show that even though we said you have to be authorized, it didn't work because we didn't make sure you had to log in with one of these tools. So Azure Active Directory now is the only way to log in. Let's go ahead and save that again. Oh, and it does this every time. If you don't come out of the authentication after you've saved it and then go back to it and then use the login and then save, you'll get that error every time. And I'm not sure why it does that, but you see it fails every single time when you do it that way without leaving the page and coming back for no reason other than you just haven't left the page. But that's that. All right, so we've got everything configured. Let's make another change to the Active Directory here. While we're here, let's change this to advanced. And the reason I want to do advanced here is I just want to be able to show that there are client secrets, issuer URLs, things that you could have here, as well as the token audiences that are allowed. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave this on advanced and save that. All right, so now we've got it locked down where you have to log in with Active Directory, and the authentication provider that is allowed is the Active Directory. And if we went out and looked at our app registrations, right now what we would see is that our APIM AF demo is registered. Now it does have an application client ID, which we're going to want later. That's going to be important to us at some point. And you'll also note over here there's the redirect URIs. So the redirect URIs allow what we're going to go in. So if you're trying to do this from a desktop or a console app and it won't work and your redirect URIs are all like one web, 0 SPA, 0 public client, the reason it'll never work is because it's trying to come from the web. It's just such a thing. But so just make sure you get your redirect URI set up for the right type of channel. So this is a web channel, and basically you're good to go on that. And you can change other things down here later if you want to allow things like access tokens instead of just ID tokens, depending on what type of flows you want to use. And so the other thing that's important here before I forget is the endpoints. And so when you're going to do authentication, for example, if you want to try to set up your authentication through Postman or through your own app, you're going to need these endpoints for OAuth 2.0 authentication. So you'll need your endpoint for the authorization and the token, as well as your callback and probably your graph endpoint as well along the way. But that's where you can find them on your app registration that we just created by pushing a button on the Azure function. So we didn't do a lot of work. We were just the Azure function. All we did was went to authentication authorization, turned this on, saved it, basically made it so you have to log in, and it created an app registration for us with all that stuff configured behind the scenes. We didn't have to do anything else. And now if I try to call this function, I should get a 401, which I do. Same thing for this one. I should get a 401, and the same thing here, except for this should let me log in. So now it says, okay, you want to log in? Sure, I'm going to log in. Okay, now that you're logged in, you can do this. So you see, I can log in through the Azure Active Directory and hit these functions, which is the way that we would want it to be. So right now we're good to go. We've locked down our functions so that no random users on the web can call them. The only people that are authorized to call these functions anymore is someone who has an authentication bearer token from my Azure Active Directory, or basically a managed identity that I'm going to allow through the APIM. Let me just double check and see if there's any questions at this point. Okay, I don't see any. All right, so now we're going to go into the API management solution, and we're going to set a couple things up. So we've already set up the API management solution, but now we need to start wiring things up. All right, so here's my API instance demo. Right now, I don't have anything in place, but what I want to do is start creating some APIs. So I probably should have set this up before I locked down the Azure Functions, because I could have proved that everything in the route was going to work. But now, without having that set up, we will get a 401 every single time. And we'll just trust that everything is going to be set up okay if we're getting a 401 and not a 50 or not a 404 or whatever. So it's very easy to wire up APIs in your API instance demo, or in your API instance itself, based on any of these different things. You can have a logic app you're calling, an app service you're calling, or your own public API. You can call off to an open API specification, a WSDL. You can set all that up. This one we're going to do today is just going to be a function app. So we're going to create two APIs, one for public consumption and one for client consumption. So here we got our first function app. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create the function app that we're going to select to. So we're just browse from this, and we have our APIM AF demo function app. And again, we're going to be using the same one that we're using for both APIs, even though we're going to pretend these are different calls. So here we have the Azure Functions. We're going to say the anonymous function is a public function that we want to expose to everyone through this API. And so we'll go ahead and do that. And so you see that's the AP, it's the name of the demo there. And then we just need to name this a little bit more useful information. So perhaps for the display name, we'll just call this all public data. And then for the URL suffix, we'll just say public. And note that it's just API instance demo.azureapi.net public here. So we see that we're getting a facade URL on top of this that will then route our calls. So that API will only have access to the get and post method of the anonymous function. And so if we did try this right now, of course, we're going to get an error because of the fact that we don't have permission. And so if we just go to test, you can see that you actually have the get request here for the API instance demo.azureapi public simple anonymous function. If I send this though, I should get a 401. Yeah, I got a 401, which is exactly what I expected because my functions are locked down and I have not authenticated as the APIM instance to say that I am authorized in the Azure Active Directory for this tenant or this client or the subscription. So we're going to have to fix that in a little bit, but what I want to do before I go too far there is make sure that I have the all public data set up correctly here. Okay, and so that's the APIM instance demo Azure API, and then the all customer data. So this one we're going to name customer, and we don't have this set up yet, so that's a 404. So that's exactly what we expected. So let's go create one more API. And we're going to call this one all customer data. So we do have to select the same function here, just kind of pretending that this is a different call. And so we'll say the simple, so actually we can put both functions in here because these clients have access to the public and the private, and rather than have to use different subscriptions, they can get all of it with one subscription this way if we do this correctly. So let's go ahead and set that up. And so this time, instead of the demo here, we're going to call this all customer data. And this is going to be customer. And so we'll create that. Again, if we ran, this should have both APIs then and all 4 method calls, the both post and get for each one. So if we do the simple authorization, we'll just use the get here so we don't have to mess around too much with posting anything. Again, here you see there's the URL to do this on a get. If I send, I should see a 401. And if I change this here now, I should see a 401 as well. So we do have everything set up correctly, but we're not authorized. So I have 2 different APIs in place, and I have, the different function calls in place. The functions are locked down, so even from the web or from my API instance at this point, nobody's getting through. The only people that are getting through so far are the people that are authenticated on my Active Directory. All right. So the next thing we want to do then is we want to set up some different products on our API instance so that we can then send people through in the subscriptions that they are associated with. So we need to create products to allow people in, and we'll make sure that way all of our API calls require a subscription token. Now we're back to using a token here. And ultimately, we are going to provide some back-end authentication that lets people be passing through into our functions. But they don't have access to our direct function URL. They have access to only the APIM URL. And they require a subscription key, which you can make different for every single client. And you can turn them off at will or rotate them as needed if people start becoming bad players. So it's a lot easier to manage this rather than just one function key to rule them all. Now you have all these different subscription keys, and if you get a bad player, you just say no more of that bad player. Furthermore, if you go into the deeper levels of the developer tools or the developer versions or the non-consumption API instances, then you can actually get throttling based on that subscription key. You can also throttle on IP address, which is really interesting too. So those are more functions of APIM, and just like we're not going deep into functions, we're not going to go deep into APIM, but just know that stuff is out there. All right, so we want to create some products to provide these subscriptions as pass-throughs for our users. And so one product that we want to create here is going to be called unrestricted. So I'm just going to say add a product here, and I'm just going to call this unrestricted. Basically, we're letting everybody in. Now, I'm not going to publish it here because I want to show you that I can easily do that later. You can also make sure that people don't get in without requesting approval, and then you have some approval process, whether that's manual or automated, in place to issue subscription tokens to those people after they've been approved. You can also say there's only going to be allowing 10 people onto this, or 10 subscriptions if you wanted to. If you had any legal terms that you want to present to them, you need to do that here. And then also, this is where we're going to select our APIs. So we're not selecting the Azure Functions now, we're selecting the APIs that we already created within APIM. So here what I want is the all public data API, and I'm going to go ahead and allow that in. So here's my unrestricted, so this is all the people. Everyone can get in, they can do the all public data, but they'll still need a subscription key. And so that was created. And what you see is on the unrestricted, what I'm going to do is create a subscription, and that subscription then is just going to be basic. And here's the thing, the name has to be unique across all of your APIMs, all of the APIs in your APIM. And so you can't use basic on this one or on all your products, excuse me. So I can't use a basic subscription here and a basic subscription on my client one. So what I need to do is just tag this basic unrestricted or something, basic public, whatever I want to call it, just so it's unique, but the display name can still be basic. So we can still say it's basic, but no, yeah. So basically now what that does is that allows anybody with a basic subscription to grab these keys and then pass that in and hit that public facing URL for the unrestricted product that allows us through. So we can show that in a minute. But first, what I want to do is go ahead and create another product. This one's going to be called client. And this is just going to be, these are our paying customers. And let's go ahead and publish this one. It doesn't require approval, doesn't have a subscription count, doesn't have any legal terms. And in this API, we want to add the all customer data. So they have access to all 4 methods, all 2 APIs, call functions, both of our functions, all 4 get and post calls to those 2 functions. All right, you see the unrestricted was accidentally not published. So let's go ahead and publish that. That's how easy it is to do. Also, if I go back here, you can see that I can unpublish that. Then I go into the client here. I'm going to create a subscription here. And maybe I have multiple subscriptions, but this is just going to be basic client. And again, it's more important on the upper levels to have more subscriptions. I might have a premium subscription here as well. Client, how about premium? And here I might allow that, and I might throttle the basic subscription at a certain number of calls per, minute, versus the premium maybe has unlimited number of calls to try to direct my specific traffic from my premium clients to have a little bit more access, or make sure that the API favors them. Either way, what that does is that allows me in. So now if I go back to my APIs, and my products here, my APIs, so my all public data, and let's do all customer data here with a simple authorization get. And so if we run this test now, we get the 401 unauthorized, and we're still blocked. So we can't really see, is our function working or not? But if we run it from here, we get a new thing. Access denied due to invalid subscription key. So what we see is that now our API has blocked them from even making the call because they don't have a subscription key. Well, where do I get the subscription key? That's just back in the subscriptions themselves. So you can either list them here. You can see the display names, but you have the different scopes and such. So right there, you might get confused by which one is the basic until you look over here. But if you go specifically here and just show the key, so we want let's get the basic client, and we'll just take the primary key. It doesn't really matter, and we'll put that in the headers under the OCP APIM subscription key. So now my all customer data has that basic subscription. Now it says back to 401. So this is a valid subscription. It made it through the API, but it's still blocked because the API can't communicate with the Azure Functions. And the all public data simple auth is still broken here. I need to give that a subscription. So let's go back here and let's grab the basic for the all public data. And we'll throw that in here in its OCP APIM subscription key. So that's the header to add the subscription key into your call. We send that again. Now we're in, but we're still getting the 401. So that means that at this point, we have successfully blocked everyone from the web from getting past the API management using this URL. So we would, maybe even put our own domain on that or whatever. We would give out our domain public simple anonymous function and tell them, these are the specifications for that call. But in order for it to actually work, they have to not only have a subscription key, but we have to have our pass-through working as well. So even with the subscription key, they're still failing, but we're ready to give them this. And then again, we could create multiple subscriptions now, making sure that bad players are limited and as we need to rotate those keys to actually lock people out without having to change our functions or worry about a function key being compromised. Okay, so both of these are ready to go. These are still locked down and they're going to be locked down. We're not going to fix that today, but basically we have those two ready to go. The last thing we need to do then is make sure that our API management instance and our Azure functions can talk to each other. So when we're looking at the API instance, when we created it, if you remember, I said I purposefully turned off the identity, but what we want is to actually have the identity set. And so if we go to our managed identities here, we're going to go ahead and turn this on as a system assigned managed identity. So that's that identity. When we were going through the creation of the APIM, I said leave it on to save yourself this step. This is how you fix it if you didn't do it. And so this will give the API instance demo a managed identity, which will allow it to authenticate with other Azure services inside of our Azure Active Directory without anybody having to log in. So this takes a minute to set this up. Once it's set up, we'll get a key here, which we don't really need, but we just need to have it set. Now, this is also the key you would use if you were going to work with Key Vault within Azure, within the API management. You would take this managed identity key and use that to add it to your access policies on your Key Vault. All right, so that's seeming to take a while. So let's go ahead and jump the gun here a little bit. Let's go back into our app instances, app registrations, and let's go back to the Azure function and we'll grab this application client ID. So that, of course, is the endpoint client ID for the application for the Azure functions. And so what I'm going to do is use this from API to provide a pass-through. All right, so this is done and it's got its object ID set. So now it can authenticate on the Azure Active Directory as this managed identity. And so that's really cool. We didn't have to do a lot there. But what we need to do is now tell the Azure functions when we call them, hey, we are authorized on the Active Directory because of this managed identity. And we can easily do that through policies. And so I just need to go ahead and grab the code for this for a second. This is the one thing I was saying that I need to make sure I don't screw up. Okay, so we're going to go and you can set policies at any level. So you can go to the customer data, you can go all the way to the get. And you see that every single place here has policies, and I could add a policy here, such as validate JWTs or mock responses or filter IPs or whatever I want to do here. Now, filtering IPs, it's interesting with the consumption, limit call rate and filter IPs. I'm not sure that that's going to work on a consumption plan. I know that limiting call rate by key doesn't work, so I'm not sure why that's even a possibility here. But if you put that in, you would get an error. But if you're on the other plans, these are how you would use your policies to limit your subscription keys or your IP addresses. So really cool stuff you can do here. But you can do this at each function level, but then you have to set the policy at each function level. You can do it for all operations on the API itself. So I could do some different things here, like maybe I want to, instead of, after it's outbound, I want to set a header or something, or maybe on the inbound, I want to set a header or pretend like a query string. Maybe I want to do an extra query string. Like maybe if they forgot name, I'm just going to pass it in here. And then I don't ever have to worry about them doing it. Or maybe I change it. They don't even know what they're sending to the third party. Or maybe that's where I inject a third party key or whatever. And you can see you can override, skip, append, or delete on that action if you wanted to do that. So really cool stuff that you can do there within APIs itself. Again, you can do it at the API call. You can do it at the all operations for the API, or you can do it at the all APIs level. And so we're going to do this authentication policy at the all APIs level so that every single call from all of the APIs will pass to the Azure function basically saying I am a managed identity and I want to authenticate on the Active Directory to use this resource. And we'll do that on an inbound policy. We'll add a policy, and we could add any of these that we wanted. If we say other, it just gives us a blank slate. And it's XML, which isn't terrible. It'd be nice if it was JSON probably, but XML works just as fine. And we have authentication dash managed dash identity resource. I can spell resource equals, and then this is where we need to drop that key from our application client ID. We'll drop that in here, and that should do it. So now every single call to any API, regardless of subscription key or product, is going to have the pass-through authentication managed identity to now hit our backend functions without having to authenticate against the Azure Active Directory directly. And so if I go now back into my API management, and I was just there, and I don't want to go to functions, I wanted to go to the instance. And now if I go to my APIs and I go to my all public data and hit the get on a test. So here you can see that I'm applying a product scope. Note that I have an OCP APIM subscription key. If I put the product unrestricted on there, it should change that key to one that's a pass through. We should be able to hopefully do this. We got a 200 OK. And what we didn't do was we didn't add our query string. So, name Brian. You see that tells me exactly what my request URL should be. My OCP APIM subscription key is obscured here, but I can actually go look at that on the subscription again very easily and give that to my users. And you see I got the 200 OK. Hello, Brian. This function executed successfully. So now from within API, I'm hitting the Azure Functions no problem because I'm authenticated. And that proves that I can then come out, do the same thing now from any call here from Postman, from pretending I'm a client now, hitting with a valid subscription key. But as soon as I change their subscription key because I got mad at them, they're blocked again. So the 5, I don't remember. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, the functions that we did today, they weren't very rocket sciencey functions. They were pretty simple, straightforward functions. But what we got to see through all of this was a really quick and easy way to protect our data from bad players when we're using the API instance. So we had that function set up. We did have both anonymous and function key functions, and we then said, okay, let's make sure that they have an Active Directory identity. So on the functions themselves, sorry. So on the functions themselves, we were able to give it an identity here. We were able to make it have an app registration by saying, here's my authentication, turn that on, log in with Active Directory, make sure it's configured for Active Directory. We set all that up. It got us the app registration, which gave us that endpoint key here for the application client. We then went out to the API instance demo, set up our products and our subscriptions on top of our function calls, which we imported. And then we very simply allowed that through by creating the managed identity on the API instance demo, and then going to the APIs and adding a simple policy to all of our API calls to allow that authentication to happen without us having to do anything behind the scenes or on our own. It was basically done for us behind the scenes. And that is how we can keep our Azure Functions and our code secure from bad players using the Azure Functions with the Azure API management solution. All right, that's all I have for today. Let's see if there's any more questions. And I'm not seeing any. So now we get to do our final 2 slides real quick. So once again, just if you want to connect with me at BL Gorman or LinkedIn in Brian L. Gorman, would love to hear from you, especially if you found this useful or interesting. And we were able to today create a function app, lock down the functions, create an API instance, create the APIs, create products and subscriptions, and then we authorize the API for the functions. And again, all of that stuff, that walkthrough, if you want to do it on your own, is available on my blog, courses.majorguidancesolutions.com/blog. But this has been a live presentation of Skill Me Up, and thank you for listening to the Azure Functions and APIM. And my name is Brian Gorman. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.